You may have caught the news coverage of this, and I think anybody with a bank account these days is probably worried about this kind of thing happening. It is bank fraud, where customers are tricked one way or another into giving thieves access to their accounts and then getting cleaned out. This story has to do with RBC. It has happened to basically all the banks at some point or another, but more than 220 RBC clients have reported similar frauds. These are fraudsters who pose as bank representatives. But police think the number could be much higher because of the fact that a lot of people don't go to police to report what has happened. Here to help us sort out the latest in bank fraud is Sylvie De Bellefeuille. She's a budgetary consultant and legal advisor for Option Consommateurs. Sylvie, welcome to CJD.
Thank you for the invitation.
What are you hearing about this latest in bank fraud or scams that target people and trick them into handing over their banking information?
What we hear is that the thieves are getting more and more specialized into this kind of fraud, and sometimes people say that people being frauded sometimes could be a little negligent with their information, but this is really not the case. What's happening is that thieves usually already have sensitive information about the consumers, and they call them claiming to work for the security department of the bank, saying, take a look at your account. We see something that is, something that is suspicious. And of course it is. They're being frauded, and they gain the trust, and they use the same kind of vocabulary the bank would use, and they really trick the consumer into providing more information, and not necessarily about their banking accounts, but it could be codes. For example, when you do a transaction, there's a code that can be sent to your cell phone, something like that. So this is the kind of information they get, and they end up giving those information to the fraudster. And most of the time, unfortunately, when it comes to RBC, what we can see is that the bank refuses to reimburse the people who basically can lose thousands of dollars in those kind of scams.
Why does the bank refuse to compensate the victims? These people are clearly victims.
They are clearly victims, and there's several problems. One of them is that according to their process, what the bank claims most of the time is that people are negligent, which is one way of putting things, but I think it's something that is not really the case. But also the laws regarding the protection that the law provides is not as clear when it comes to fraud into the banking accounts than it would be on your credit card, for example. So we need stronger laws to make it clear that the banks are should be held accountable, and they are supposed to keep our information safe. And the problem is that fraudsters do get the information. I don't know how, but they do get the information.
So this would be a case of some type of an internal problem within the bank where certain details are linked about individuals who are clients, and the fraudsters start their approach using that?
This could be one way of doing that. We understand from some of the information we got that this is what the police suspect. But that kind of information is very difficult, and what is the scope of the fraud is very difficult to analyze. As you mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of people fail to report those frauds because they feel ashamed of what happened, because they do believe that the answer will be you were negligent, and they're not wrong into thinking that because that's what the banks say at the end. But it's really a sophisticated fraud, and people don't fall into that kind of trap because they're negligent. It's because the fraud is really well played.
Well, we had heard in recent months that the fraudsters are now able to fool a caller ID system. So if you're getting a call at home and you have caller ID, you will look at the phone number that's coming in for that call, and it will say it's coming from the bank. So
Yes.
if you're relying on that to determine whether it's a legitimate call, you would instantly be fooled by the fraudsters.
Exactly, but it's not the only way to use. It is one of the ways, and this is why the fraud is so sophisticated. Is that yes, they change the number, they use what we call spoofing, which is changing the number on your caller ID, but they also have other information. So they really are into a position where they gain the trust of the consumer while also putting a sense of fear. And when people are stressed, sometimes they may overlook a few details, but people are afraid of losing money, and they end up losing money.
What is your advice then to consumers? How do you protect yourself when you can't trust calls coming into your home, when these callers seem to have information about you that only the bank would have? How do you protect yourself?
Well, the easiest thing to do is to simply hang up. It may seem rude, but the thing is to not provide any information, especially if you have not initiated the call. So the first thing to do is to hang up and wait a few minutes and call the number that is behind your cards to make sure that you really are talking to someone at the bank.
I suppose you could also just go to your branch.
Of course, that could be another way to do that, yes. But, well, if the bank is open, that's a good way also to do that. But at least not to provide any information and end the conversation as soon as possible without giving any information. If it's really the bank calling you, they will not be frustrated because you hung up, because you're just being, careful. So you can then explain that you fear the call was not legitimate. So it's not something that is a problem. But what I sometimes, because sometimes we see people that don't want to be rude or anything. So my advice is find a bogus reason to hang up the phone, like I have something on the stove or something like that. So just that way, if it's really the bank, you're not insulting anybody, but you put an end to a call that could be, in the end, a fraud made by a thief.
Are there legitimate reasons why a bank would call and, for example, tell you, I'm sending a courier to pick up your debit card for an investigation, or I need you to put your credit cards in an envelope and leave it for the courier. The courier is going to come and pick up. Is that ever legitimately done by a bank?
No, that is never a legitimate thing to do. If the bank would like to have your card, they will ask you to go to their branch and leave the card at the counter, for example, to someone who works at the bank. Otherwise, it is not a good idea to give a card to anybody. And
would a bank ever have a legitimate reason on the telephone to say, please give me the security code that just moved onto your cell phone? This kind of situation may happen. It did happen to me into a legitimate call, but it was a call that I did insinuate. So it is something different. So sometimes it may be used in order to confirm your identity, but it is something that is legitimate if you are the one calling the bank. If not, the best thing to do is really to end the call and call your bank to make sure that everything is going well. And as you say, don't use their number to call the bank. Look on the back of your debit or credit card and call that number. Exactly. And the problem is sometimes the number that may appear may be that number on your caller ID. So which makes things, even more, which create a lot more confusion to consumers. So it's not because a number is stated on your caller ID that the call really comes from that number. You say that the laws have to be toughened up to hold banks accountable. How could that be accomplished? Well, for example, the law did change in Quebec. It's not enforced yet, but we do have protection within the Consumer Protection Act when it comes to transactions that are not authorized on your credit card. In those situations, the liability of a consumer is limited to $50.
a similar kind of protection could also be used on banking accounts. Now, the other problem is whether or not the transaction was authorized or not. Bank claims that when you give number to the thief, you do give your authorization to the transaction, so then you're held accountable. But when it comes to a sophisticated fraud, I'm not sure that you're really giving. Is it a real?
No, it's not consent. No, you can't give consent if you're being misled by fraudsters. That's not real consent.
This is what we're saying, but unfortunately, banks don't seem to see these things the same way.
Wow. Continue fighting the good fight, Sylvie, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Sylvie De Bellefeuille is a budgetary consultant and legal advisor for Option Consommateurs.